I'm going to share several tips with you that I have used over the last 30 years when cold calling real estate sellers. The first thing that I like to do is I actually like to do a little research in regards to the area and the type of client that I will be calling, whether they're owner-occupied or non-owner-occupied. This actually makes a big difference because when you're dealing with non-owner-occupied sellers, you seem to find that they have a little bit more motivation to sell when it comes down to dealing with the property that they're not living in or they don't have an emotional tie to it. The next thing we like to do is we like to make sure that we set ourselves at least a good 3 to 4 hours of consistent cold calling to be able to make sure that we maximize the time that we're doing. We have a sequence of questions that we ask whenever we're on the phone cold calling. I do this myself, and I've been doing it for the last 30 years along with several of the team members and even my brothers who are in the business. What I've done is I've added a script at the bottom you guys can take advantage of. Again, questions are very simple, but they're sequential and they give you all the necessary information from the seller if you ask them in order. When talking to a seller, make sure that you pay really close attention to the tonality of the voice of a seller. When a seller is really motivated, you will hear that in the tone of voice. And as I mentioned before, sometimes sellers will say things in between the lines that you can catch if you're attentively listening to what it is that they're saying. You will realize that as you ask certain questions, sellers will start to divulge more information. Sometimes you have the tendency to want to ask the next question to grab more information, but that's a big mistake when you're cold calling. What you should do is let the seller talk and divulge as much information as possible. Why? Because people like to talk. And when you ask sellers about their property or their situation, they will continue to talk about their process or their ongoing problem and continue to divulge information. Sometimes I have deviated off the script because if they start talking about certain situations that are their motivation for wanting to sell, then I start to make different types of questions. But just like anybody else, I'm sure you guys can be able to ask questions on the fly. One of the other things that we do is we like to build rapport with sellers as quickly as possible. If a seller makes a comment about their property or their condition or any type of situation that you can continue on, we try to build rapport with the seller as quickly as possible. When you're on the phone versus a text or email or even a mail out, it's the best way to make a connection with the seller and to grab as much information as possible. If there is something that we do forget, then we'll do a follow-up on it. But typically in the initial call, that's when you're going to get the majority of the information that you're looking for when you're cold calling. Always keep that in mind. There's a ratio that we like to follow, and it's called the 70-30 rule. 70% of the conversation when talking to a seller, whether through a mail out, a text that turns into a call, or when you're cold calling, should be done by the seller and 30% by yourself. When getting ready to conclude on your cold call with the seller on the initial call, make sure that you don't leave it without a closing on there, and you want to do a soft approach close. One of the things that we do is we say, great, now that I've gathered all the information, let me go ahead and do some research and get back to you. Would it be okay if I give you a call this afternoon or maybe tomorrow around 10 in the morning? Very important to pin down a time and your motive for calling back and explaining why you're calling back. And usually a seller that's motivated will say, you know what, call me tonight, call me tomorrow, call me tomorrow evening. I'm going to be busy in the morning. Whatever the reason is, you will find out that they will give you a time frame that's okay for you to reach out back to them. Have enough time to do your comparables, your due diligence, and get your offer ready. So when you do reach out to them, you'll have a time set. There's one of two things I like to do when calling back. If it's a seller that's local here to my area, then what I initially do on the call back is tell them that I've gathered all the information and that I like to be able to meet with them in person so I can go over all the comparables and the offer that I want to present. Typically they say yes, and that's usually when we follow up for an appointment to go ahead and meet with person. Prior to closing the conversation with the seller on the initial call, I'll always ask as well, are they the only decision makers? Extremely important, because you want to make sure that when you meet with the seller, whether it's in person or when you call back to present your offer over the phone, that you're dealing with everybody who has the ability to say yes or no to you right then and there. Extremely important. Now, if you're calling back because it's a seller and you're wholesaling a property on a nationwide level that you're trying to acquire, then you want to make sure again that all the decision makers are there as you get ready to present your offer. What I like to do at this point is I like to be able to email them the comparables beforehand and then initiate the call and let them know that, hey, let's pull the comparables and take a look at them together, because it's easier to present your offer when you have facts or data in front of the seller and yourself that you guys both are looking at. If the seller can see that properties that are similar to theirs have actually sold and closed in the same type of condition, location, and area, it's easy for you to be able to get your offer accepted. 75 to 80% of the time, we get our offers accepted when we provide the data.